Who is John Restivo? Yes, he is the man accused of a crime that he did not commit. A man who spent 18 years behind bars, going to prison before a cell phone was invented, and being exonerated well after. The tragic murder he was accused of may be well known, but what is known of the person John Restivo? John is more than an accused man. Before someone else's false confessions sent his life into a spiral, John worked for his retired police officer father, a veteran of the force for 20 years, alongside his brother at the family moving and storage company. The Restivos were a very close family, having family dinners every Sunday, and at 24, John's father passed away from a heart attack. It would be only a year later his girlfriend gave birth to their son. Being overwhelmed, taking over as the oldest brother, and running the family business with a brand new baby, John was overwhelmed and very tense. But the next thing he knew, three unmarked cars drove up next to him, identified themselves as police, and requested him to come in for questioning. Upon being taken into custody, John was informed there was a homicide, with his first thoughts racing to the safety of his girlfriend and his infant son, wondering if they were victims. But that would not be the case, as we will discuss. Before we enter into this case that John was sentenced for, some important background information. John Restivo was interrogated for a similar case just before Teresa's. On the evening of June 12, 1984, 15-year-old Kelly Morrissey disappeared and has never been found. This disappearance was determined to involve foul play. During the initial period of the investigation into her disappearance, all three men convicted of Teresa's murder were interrogated by police. The focus was on Dennis Halstead, as authorities believed him to be associated with her disappearance. John Restivo had been interviewed as part of this investigation and mentioned that he was acquainted with John Cogart, a sometimes employee of Restivo's family moving business. John Cogart had dated this missing girl, and she had frequented his apartment. While Restivo knew Cogart, he had never met this victim. However, the murder victim that John Restivo was convicted of raping and killing is 16-year-old Teresa Fusco, who disappeared on the evening of November 10th, 1984, after a shift at the local roller skating rink. It would be almost a month before on December 5th, 1984, Teresa's naked and abused body would be discovered in a wooded area of Lynbrook, New York. Concealed by pallets and leaves, Teresa's face was badly beaten, with marks around her neck. A medical examiner would determine cause of death as ligature strangulation, additionally finding semen and sperm on vaginal swabs, indicating that she had been raped prior to her death. Police collected that DNA evidence left by the rape. However, the genes that had possible involvement were discarded inadvertently, which we will discuss further in a moment. The rope used to kill Teresa would be lost as the case progresses, losing the opportunity to test it for blood or any additional evidence. As it goes in trial, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. However, there seemed to be some room for reasonable doubt admitted from this case for multiple reasons that were overlooked. John French, an unrelated person, reported that his Oldsmobile stolen the night that Teresa went missing. It was parked less than a mile from Hot Skates, the last place that Teresa was seen alive. The vehicle was found over a week later, close to where Teresa's body would be found. However, authorities did not know that this is where her body would be found when they found the car. The window of the car had been smashed and a pair of women's jeans were found under the passenger seat upon finding it. They were thrown out, along with several missing items, including a rope that French had in the car, which he had reported to police after he found out about Teresa's body being discovered. Upon finding her body, the car was processed with hair being found in the vehicle, similar to that of the victim. French identified the rope to use to kill Teresa as the rope that was in his stolen car, but the jeans were discarded inadvertently. It would be only a few months later that 19-year-old Jacqueline Martrella from the same geographical area would be discovered missing the evening of April 22nd, 1985, and found deceased by strangulation, nude and raped in an open area on a golf course in March 26th, 1985. So very similar to Teresa. Let's review the interrogation through the eyes of John Restivo. It was printed by the New Yorker and it is summarized as follows. But this is a story of nightmares, quite literally. Upon entering the interrogation room, one of the detectives grabbed him by the throat and began screaming in his face things like, "Is this how you killed her?" Restivo was kept at the station for 20 hours, during which he was not allowed to eat, rest, or call his girlfriend, and no one knew where he was. Restivo remembers that when he said he had a right to a lawyer, Vlope, the lead detective, told him, "This is un-America, and you have no rights here." The Vlope's partner, Robert Dempsey, hit him in the face. As soon as Restivo was released after maintaining his innocence for 20 hours, he went straight to an attorney who photographed his bruises and filed a complaint against the detectives. Detectives denied ever hitting Restivo, and his phones were tapped. His home was bugged, and he recalled, "Everywhere I went, they started following me around." Anybody he was associated with, the police would take in for long interrogations. On the night of the crime in question, Restivo had been in Winnetog, sanding floors at his new house with a friend. The police brought this friend in and questioned him for 10 hours. Restivo was told that they would turn his life, the life of his brother, his mother, girlfriend, and infant son, into a nightmare. And they did. Throughout the entirety of these interrogations, Restivo maintained his innocence. One of these associates taken in for interrogation was a part-time worker at Restivo's moving company, John Cogert. In late 1985, Cogert was brought into police headquarters for a polygraph examination. After 3 polygraphs, a detective analyzed Cogert's polygraph charts and informed Cogert that he was lying. The details were irresolute as to whether or not Cogert passed and was given false results, or if he truly failed when he denied involvement in the victim's murder. Multiple officers then proceeded to interrogate Cogert for 12 hours, with some sources claiming up to 18, repeatedly telling him that he failed these lie detector tests and bombarded with allegations that he, Restivo, and Halstead abducted, raped, and murdered this victim. Eventually, Cogert would sign a confession that had been handwritten by the detectives while sitting before a video camera and confessing to the crime. This confession was the 6th version of the facts allegedly given by Cogert. And according to the final version of the confession, Restivo, Cogert, and Halstead were driving Restivo's van. They encountered the victim, who got in voluntarily. Halstead and Cogert stripped the victim, and Halstead raped her. After they arrived at the cemetery, Restivo stopped the van and also raped the victim. During the attack, the victim drifted in and out of consciousness. When she began to regain consciousness after the rape, she grew frantic, and Cogert strangled her with a hard nylon rope. Cogert's confession did not include any new details about the crime not previously known by law enforcement. Cogert was taken to the site where the victim's body had been discovered before his confession, but again was unable to offer any new details about this crime. Based on Cogert's confession, Restivo's van was searched. Hairs were recovered and tested in a forensic lab. However, there was a large question of police tampering with this evidence. Restivo's van had been up on blocks at his mother's house on the night of the crime, and Cogert recanted his confession almost immediately. But the prosecution's case rested heavily on Vlope's report to the district attorney, which noted a significant piece of evidence recovered from Restivo's van, 2 strands of hair on the floor, which appeared to have come from the victim's head. Restivo's lawyer argued that police had submitted tainted evidence, but the prosecution was unfazed. Restivo was then sentenced to 33 years to life. Before he was led away in handcuffs, he read aloud an 18-page letter. Each defendant in this case was offered a deal by the DA. "I myself was offered 3 to 9 to cooperate, but I have no knowledge of this crime, and I would not lie to protect myself." Once taken into custody, even before he was convicted, he started writing letters to anybody he could come up with, pleading his innocence, asking for help. In prison, he got a job in the law library so he could research his case. John lost everything, including his family. His girlfriend came to see him one time with their son and would later inform John she had a new husband and ask him to sign over the rights of a child. John, thinking the little boy growing up with a father outside of prison versus inside, would sign over his rights and never see his son again. After 18 years of incarceration, an intact vaginal swab would clear the name of all 3 men, with no DNA match to any of them. This swab was found by Nia Morrison of the New York Innocence Project as a result of a 10-year reinvestigation. Proof that John Restivo had been honest and not guilty the entirety of his sentence. This evidence was taken to trial by Mr. Cogert in 2005, and after 3 long months, he finally found a finding of innocence for Cogert. The trial judge was so swept in the case that the prosecution dropped the indictment against John and Dennis Halstead only 1 week after the previous verdict of innocence for Cogert. Finally, after 18 long and painful years, all 3 men would be vindicated for a crime they did not commit. Although John Restivo never gave a guilty confession and there was limited physical evidence that could be manipulated to make him appear guilty, 18 years of his life were taken from the accusations and confessions of others. Focusing on the confession of John Cogert and the differences between his interrogation and John Restivo's interrogation, including how the interrogations were performed. In this case, there was an overwhelming amount of time that the suspects were interrogated without proper care, physically assaulted, and denied legal representation. In an article written by Casson, Messner, and Coolwell, it was found common common to isolate suspects and confront them with evidence of their guilt, but still 81% of participants felt that these interrogations should be recorded. In this specific case, the lack of physical evidence and the extent to which the confession was gained should have been reviewed, and the video could have been detrimental. In a study based on youth, over one-third of the sample claimed to make a true admission, with the majority feeling they experienced a high-pressure interrogation, including threats. The suspects here were interrogated for the murder of Teresa felt high pressure in their interrogations, while Restivo, just older than Kogert, handled himself differently and was part of the one-third that remained truthful. Kogert could not continue with the pressure, and he did what he could to make the police stop pressing him after so many hours in custody. The Miranda rights were specifically designed to prevent situations like that of Restivo. Numerous studies have shown that innocent individuals often become victims when they waive these rights. And Restivo's case is no exception. When he requested an attorney, he was denied this right because he had previously waived his rights during the interrogation. Research highlights how different levels of comprehension can affect this interpretation of our Miranda rights and their components, and this case will not be an exception.